She doesn't leave with chaos or confrontation, and that's what makes it dangerous, because silence feels harmless at first. No shouting, no final argument, no moment that tells him this is the end. He assumes it's just a phase, just space, just another quiet stretch they'll survive. But silence isn't empty, it's observant. It waits while he stays comfortable, unaware that every unspoken feeling is turning into a decision. When she finally leaves, it doesn't register as loss right away. It feels like peace, and that false calm is the trap. Then one day the absence becomes undeniable. He looks for her in small moments, habitual gestures, shared routines, unasked questions, and finds nothing. There's no anger to respond to, no door left open to knock on, no words he can undo or explain away. That's when it breaks him. Not that she left, but that she left without noise, without warning, and without needing him to notice until it was already too late. Silence's power is often misunderstood because it doesn't announce itself. People expect power to be loud, forceful, visible. They associate it with raised voices, ultimatums, dramatic exits. But silence works differently. Silence doesn't try to win an argument. It ends the need for one. When she becomes quiet, it isn't weakness or surrender, it's clarity. It means she has already said everything that needed to be said, even if he wasn't listening at the time. Silence arrives only after effort has been exhausted, after explanations have gone unheard, after emotions have been repeated until they lost their shape. What makes silence powerful is that it removes participation. Arguments keep connections alive, even unhealthy ones. As long as she reacts, responds, explains, or pleads, there is still energy flowing between them. Silence cuts that energy off. It denies him the comfort of engagement. There's no reassurance, no feedback, no emotional mirror, and that absence forces him to confront something far more unsettling than anger, irrelevance. Silence tells him he no longer has access to her inner world, and access was the thing he took for granted. Silence also shifts control. While noise feels dominant, it actually gives the other person something to push against. Silence gives nothing. It doesn't defend itself, doesn't justify, doesn't negotiate. It stands firm without confrontation. In that stillness, decisions are already made. The power lies in finality, not in drama. By the time she is quiet, she is no longer asking to be understood. She understands herself. That self-understanding becomes the foundation of her strength. There is also a psychological weight to silence. Humans are wired to respond to cues, tone, expression, words. Silence removes those cues and replaces them with uncertainty. He begins to fill the gaps with his own thoughts, his own regrets, his own realizations. Silence turns inward, forcing reflection where distraction once existed. It becomes a mirror he can't look away from. And unlike anger, silence doesn't fade quickly. It lingers. It follows him into ordinary moments, into quiet rooms, into memories he can't rewrite. Silence is powerful because it is irreversible. Words can be taken back, arguments can be reframed, apologies can be made. Silence doesn't offer that flexibility. Once she withdraws, emotionally, there is no clear moment to interrupt, no clear point of repair. The door doesn't slam. It simply isn't there anymore. That absence becomes permanent, and permanence is what gives silence its quiet authority. In choosing silence, she chooses herself without asking permission. She stops performing pain in hopes of being understood. She stops translating her feelings into language that keeps getting ignored. Silence becomes the most honest response she has left, not to punish, but to preserve what remains of her dignity, her energy, her sense of self, leaving him surrounded not by noise, but by the weight of what was finally withheld. Delayed realization is one of the most painful forms of understanding because it arrives too late to be useful. While she was present, her value blended into routine. Her patience felt endless, her forgiveness predictable, her presence reliable enough to be overlooked. He didn't wake up each day thinking he was losing her because loss hadn't announced itself yet. What he had felt permanent, and permanence breeds carelessness. Love became background noise rather than something to listen to closely. He believed effort could be postponed, that attention could be given later, that understanding could wait. When she finally leaves, the realization doesn't strike immediately. At first, there is confusion rather than regret. He notices the quiet but mistakes it for peace. He assumes distance is temporary, that time will smooth things over the way it always has. This is where delayed realization sharpens its edge, because it allows him to believe nothing has truly changed. The absence hasn't yet become personal. It hasn't demanded reflection. It hasn't hurt enough to be taken seriously. Then the details start surfacing. He reaches for habits that no longer exist. He expects responses that never come. He recalls moments he dismissed, conversations he half listened to, emotions he minimized. Each memory reframes itself. What once seemed small now feels significant. What he labeled overreaction now looks like warning. Realization doesn't arrive as a single moment of clarity, but as a slow accumulation of regret, stacking one memory on top of another until the weight becomes unavoidable. The cruelty of delayed realization is that it brings insight without opportunity. He finally understands what she was asking for, not in words but in presence, consistency, and care. He recognizes how often she met him halfway alone. He sees how love had been offered quietly, steadily, without conditions, and how easily it was taken for granted. This understanding would have changed everything if it had arrived earlier. Instead, it arrives when action no longer matters. Delayed realization also exposes the illusion of control. He believed he had time, that relationships bend without breaking, that patience doesn't expire. He learns too late that emotional endurance has limits, and when those limits are crossed, love doesn't always announce its exit. It simply withdraws. The realization that she didn't leave impulsively but after long consideration deepens the loss. He wasn't abandoned in a moment of anger. He was left after being fully seen and quietly given up on. This form of understanding lingers because it can't be resolved. There is no conversation to correct the past, no gesture that can undo neglect. He carries awareness without relief, insight without repair. Delayed realization doesn't offer growth in the way people like to believe it does. It offers clarity wrapped in permanence. He finally knows what he had, how he lost it, and why it mattered. But knowledge arrives hand in hand with absence, and that absence becomes the lasting consequence of understanding that came too late. Emotional absence is more devastating than visible conflict because it erases rather than confronts. When she leaves, what remains is not anger echoing through rooms or memories replaying arguments, but a hollow stillness that feels unfamiliar and unsettling. Emotional absence isn't immediately recognized as pain because it doesn't demand attention. It settles quietly into daily life, disguising itself as normalcy. He continues his routines, goes through his days, and tells himself that nothing is truly wrong, yet something essential is missing, something he cannot name at first. What makes emotional absence so haunting is that it removes connection without removing memory. Her presence still exists in traces, habits formed together, spaces once shared, conversations that ended mid-thought. These remnants create a constant contrast between what was and what is. There is no emotional response to collide with, no resistance to push against. The absence offers no feedback, no closure, no reassurance. It simply exists, persistent and unyielding, reminding him that the emotional exchange he relied on has ended. Emotional absence also dismantles identity. Relationships quietly shape how people see themselves, and when that emotional mirror disappears, confusion follows. He no longer has someone who notices the small shifts in his mood, who recognizes him beyond surface interactions. Without that recognition, he feels less defined, as though part of himself has been erased along with her presence. The pain isn't just missing her, it's missing the version of himself that existed when she was there. Unlike anger, emotional absence doesn't offer release. There is no argument to resolve, no apology to deliver, no forgiveness to seek. Anger burns hot and eventually cools. Absence stays cold. It doesn't move or change, and that stillness becomes suffocating. He finds himself replaying moments not to fix them but to feel something. Even regret becomes a way to replace numbness with sensation. Emotional absence pushes him inward, forcing him to sit with thoughts he avoided when distraction was available. The cruelty of emotional absence lies in its invisibility to others. From the outside, he appears fine. Life goes on, responsibilities remain, and nothing seems outwardly broken. But internally, there is a constant sense of loss that can't be easily explained. How do you describe pain caused by something that isn't there? The lack of a tangible source makes the grief feel illegitimate, as though it doesn't deserve acknowledgement even though it quietly consumes him. Emotional absence also alters time. Moments stretch longer, nights feel heavier, and silence becomes louder than sound ever was. He realizes that what he misses most isn't specific actions or words, but the feeling of being emotionally accompanied. The world feels less responsive, less alive. because there is no one sharing it with him in the way she once died. D. Her absence doesn't shout, doesn't accuse, doesn't demand recognition, but it reshapes his internal landscape completely, leaving him surrounded not by conflict, but by an emptiness that steadily defines his experience of everything else. Pride and neglect often work together quietly, making them difficult to recognize while damage is being done. Pride convinces him that being right matters more than being attentive. It tells him that his perspective is sufficient, that his intentions should be understood without explanation, that love should adapt to him rather than require conscious effort. Neglect grows in the shadow of that pride. It shows up as delayed replies, half-listened conversations, postponed apologies, and assumptions that her patience will cover the gaps he leaves behind. Neither pride nor neglect feels cruel in the moment. They feel justified, even harmless. Pride creates emotional distance by refusing vulnerability. Admitting fault feels like weakness, so he avoids it. Acknowledging her pain feels like surrender, so he minimizes it. He believes staying composed means staying strong, not realizing that emotional restraint can look like indifference from the other side. Over time, she learns that expressing herself leads to defensiveness or dismissal rather than understanding. Pride doesn't raise its voice, it quietly closes doors. It replaces curiosity with certainty and empathy with ego. Neglect follows naturally. When pride tells him he doesn't need to change, neglect gives him permission to stop trying. Effort becomes inconsistent. Attention becomes conditional. He stops noticing shifts in her tone, changes in her behavior, the moments where she reacts out more softly because she's tired of being unheard. Neglect isn't always the absence of love, often it's the absence of presence. He is there physically but emotionally unavailable, distracted, or distant, assuming that proximity alone is enough. What makes this combination destructive is that it invalidates her experience without openly rejecting it. She isn't told to leave. She isn't told she doesn't matter. Instead, she is shown, repeatedly, that her feelings rank below his comfort. Pride ensures he doesn't question himself. Neglect ensures she questions herself instead. She begins to wonder if she's asking for too much, if she's being unreasonable, if silence might be easier than explanation. Eventually, pride blinds him to warning signs. He mistakes her quietness for acceptance. He interprets her reduced expectations as maturity. He doesn't see that neglect has drained her desire to engage. When she stops asking, stops reminding, stops reacting, he feels a false sense of stability. Pride reassures him that things have settled, when in reality they have ended internally for her. Neglect has a cumulative effect. Each overlooked moment becomes evidence that effort is one-sided. Each unaddressed hurt becomes heavier than the last. She doesn't leave because of one mistake. She leaves because pride prevented accountability, and neglect made love feel lonely. By the time she chooses herself, she has already grieved the relationship while still inside it, and his pride ensures he only understands the cost once she is gone. Irreversible loss is the kind of ending that doesn't announce itself as final until it already is. It isn't dramatic or sudden, it's quiet, settled, and absolute. When she leaves in this way, there is no sense of urgency because urgency belongs to moments that can still be saved. This loss carries a calm certainty, as though the decision has already passed through doubt, pain, and reflection long before it reached action. By the time he recognizes what is happening, the ending is no longer in motion. It has already arrived. What makes irreversible loss so devastating is the absence of options. There is nothing left to negotiate, no moment left to correct, no version of the future where effort might change the outcome. He realizes that love, once withdrawn completely, does not always respond to pursuit. The door isn't closed in anger, it simply no longer exists. This kind of loss doesn't invite growth or redemption in the way stories often promise. It leaves only acceptance, and acceptance is one of the hardest forms of pain. Irreversible loss forces him to confront the truth that timing matters more than intention. Wanting to change after the moment has passed holds no power. Apologies spoken too late lose their meaning, not because they aren't sincere, but because sincerity cannot reverse emotional exhaustion. He understands that she didn't leave because she stopped caring, but because caring had become too costly. That realization deepens the loss, turning it into something heavier than rejection. It becomes consequence. This type of loss reshapes memory. He begins to see the past not as a series of moments, that led to an ending, but as a fragile timeline where everything depended on attention he didn't give. Every choice now feels permanent. Every missed opportunity becomes fixed in place, unchangeable. Irreversible loss removes the comfort of what if by answering it with silence. The future he imagined no longer exists, and there is no alternate version to hope for. There is also a profound loneliness in irreversible loss because it must be carried alone. Others may offer reassurance, suggest moving on, or frame it as a lesson. None of that touches the reality of knowing that someone who once knew you deeply has chosen a life without you in it. This loss doesn't fade quickly because it isn't tied to a single event. It's tied to finality, to the knowledge that the connection will never return in any form. Irreversible loss changes how he experiences everything that follows. Love becomes cautious, memory becomes sharper, silence becomes heavier. He learns too late that some departures are not invitations to chase, but confirmations that the chance has passed. There is no redemption arc waiting beyond this loss, only the quiet understanding that some endings exist not to teach, but to remain fixed and unmovable, as a reminder of what happens when love is realized only after it is no longer available. In the end, her quiet departure is not an act of cruelty, but of final understanding. She leaves after giving all the words she had, after offering patience, presence, and chances that went unnoticed. What destroys him is not the loss itself, but the clarity that comes with it. The realization that love doesn't always announce its breaking point, and that silence can be the loudest form of truth. He learns that some people don't leave to be chased, explained to, or convinced. They leave because they have already decided to choose themselves. And in that quiet choice lies the deepest consequence, the knowledge that what was once held carelessly is now gone forever, not with anger or accusation, but with a calm finality that echoes longer than any goodbye ever could.